People's number one goal is to feel respected.
One thing about leadership is that from a personal standpoint, we often have blind spots.
I really believe that most leaders, if they're challenged, know their own blind spots, right? Sometimes that team's united and it's against me, and I still think that's okay. I have been shocked at the number of people who, when you've had that candid conversation, have been like, you're right, this probably isn't the right fit. I have fired people who've thanked me at the end of it.
Hello, I am so excited to have my new friend, Dave Urso, here with me today. We were introduced through a mutual friend who shared his blog, his book entitled Everyday Heroes, A Guide to Leadership with me, and he is all things leadership. So this is one of those conversations that has nothing really to do with real estate specifically, and all things to do about what all of our listeners encounter every day in that trying to master the world of leadership. So Dave, before we dive into the juicy parts and learn all the ways that we can become better leaders, I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, perfect. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and chat with you for a little bit. I love leadership. I've loved leadership as long as I can remember, but it's funny, and thinking about sort of my own experiences, I go all the way back to like 8th grade, right? And thinking about this juxtaposition in 8th grade where my peers voted me as editor of the yearbook, like the 8th grade yearbook. So I got to be the one who did. Now, this was back in the 90s, right? So we actually physically laid out the yearbook and took pictures of it and sent it to the publisher and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, I have a lot of respect from this group. Like, things are going really well. And then the last page of the yearbook is like a superlative story that kind of unfolds, and I got voted most likely to become a priest. So I was like, okay, there's some interplay there. That is not how my journey played. From there, I'm not a priest today, but it was such a funny kind of moment just to see kind of those parallel pieces of the same kind of coin. But I think when I think back through that entire kind of experience, there were so many leadership moments that were happening that I didn't realize at the time, right? And I look back now and was like, oh, this job working at the movie theater or in this role in the high school and things like that. And then really for me, coming to life in college. So getting to college and working through that. I was just blogging this week about like my total failed attempt at auditioning to be the Duke Dog, the mascot for the college. And how that went totally sideways. And long story short, I did not get to be the mascot. It's not how it played from there. But things like that, but being like, boy, it was such part of this journey of growth and development. And then getting into graduate school and all of a sudden realizing that the spaces and the places I was finding myself had this tremendous opportunity to make an impact. So how was I going to leverage that? And then going, was I in the right place at the right time, or is leadership really about finding the right project, finding the right opportunity based on whatever space you're in to be able to make a difference and kind of push it forward? I'm really fortunate to be able to say with 100% confidence that it's the leaders who helped me along the way, like people who saw something in me, mentored me, pulled me along, told me that something was possible. Because I think there have been some really significant moments in my journey where I opted not to see my own potential, where I opted just kind of to get in the pit and sit there and keep my eyes closed and say, let the world happen to me. I'm done. I'm done trying. I'm done putting myself out there. And each time someone's come along and said, hey, there's something impressive for us to accomplish together. Let's go together. And each time that's kind of been a transformative moment for me. So that has been kind of this career. I'm 23 years in higher education now at this point. And there have been so many different ways to challenge and test that leadership. And I still think it's growing in ways that I hope are meaningful.
Well, it's interesting that you share that you are going to be a priest, because everyone needs a little bit of Jesus in their life. I tell my kids that all the time. And to be quite honest, mine was that I was going to be an airline stewardess. So the friendly skies are probably grateful that I'm not there. At the same time, I would have brought a lot of energy and fun. So
yeah, it would have been pretty good, I think.
That's great. You know, it's interesting when you say about how the leaders got you there. So often, we look at leadership as the people that get us there, as the people that bring us up. And we forget the role that we play as leaders just in everyday life. And I call those lollipop moments where you don't really know that you've impacted someone's life until they come back years and years later, or you read a story or something. And oftentimes you don't ever know that you are a true leader. And so leadership to me, or the word leader, is often designated by someone that runs something or is in charge of something or spearheads something. But at the end of the day, we're all leaders. And that's what I love about this conversation, is that you don't have to be the actual leader of the line or leader of the pack to be a leader in your own right. And so that's, that's one of those things where you talk about the Duke dog. Well, if you had done it, that would have been fun to see. We could have thrown a picture up. But at the end of the day, you still got out there and people led you to that. So, one thing about leadership is that from a personal standpoint, we often have blind spots. And I know you and I chatted about this a little bit last time we spoke about how we don't necessarily see those blind spots and ways that you have coached others around, identifying the blind spots, questions that you ask to help them see the blind spots, which actually elevate them as a leader. Would you mind sharing some of that with us?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and I really believe that most leaders, if they're challenged, know their own blind spots, right? I don't think that we're ignorant to our own areas where maybe we take a shortcut, maybe we mail it in, maybe we don't look at a person or a project or an opportunity the same way that we would if it was just a little bit different. And I think being aware of that is really significant. If we're not, then the question becomes, are we willing to be vulnerable enough to ask the people who know us well what those blind spots are and to kind of identify them? Because I think that becomes a part of it as well, about being like, okay, can I, with a receptive mind, be like, what do you see as my blind spot here, my weak opportunity? One of my mentors will routinely remind me that any strength overused becomes a weakness. And that just resonates for me. It's this idea of going like, okay, even the things we do really well carry with them an implicit downside that if we're aware of and mitigating for. So it's one of those things to go, okay, well, my type A manifests, am I making sure my admin team knows, like, here's how I need you to step in. Here's some code words you can use during a meeting if I seem to be getting too task focused and have lost sight kind of the team effort here. And here's how we kind of press with that. I think it's kind of that questioning approach. Like, who do you have in your life that's asking you authentic questions routinely? Who have you let close enough that has a little bit of distance from your family, a little bit of distance from your supervisory tree, who you can go and ask vulnerable questions, but they also ask you those vulnerable questions back, right? Because I've always seen my primary role as to share a compelling vision with the team. And then I envision myself as the bumpers on the bowling alley. All I'm trying to do is not let you veer too far to either side, and I'm just going to keep you out of the gutters. But as long as we're moving in that direction, then I don't have to be too prescriptive on what that connection is, and really instead say, okay, can I coach you and ask you to find that answer on your own and get us moving closer towards that shared vision?
Yeah, and the key with that too is being willing to hear the response, right? We can ask the hard questions of each other, and having that third party, like a mentor, a coach, someone that's not in your inner circle, it allows you to answer more vulnerably or transparently to what the ask is, right? Or to be more honest with yourself out loud and where some of those weaknesses are showing up, but like you said, weaknesses within the strengths. And I can hear you on the type A. My assistant is probably listening to this, Chris, and saying, yeah, there's Debbie. But again, here's where I insert the code word, the Mayday, the red flag, all the things when she gets a little crazy, or I just know that she's crazy. So yeah.
Sometimes we just have to be accepted.
Right.
That's okay too.
Yes, exactly. And accepting, right? As a leader, being accepting. What's interesting is leaders often equate involvement as value. So getting in there, getting in the trenches, getting in the weeds, being present all the time. And our workers or colleagues often feel that that's a little bit more defined as micromanagement. So how do you see, or what has been your experience, even in the academic setting, where empowerment steps in? How are you educating your leaders within your organization to create empowerment, but not create micromanagement?
Yeah, it's the fishbowl moment, right? Is that we coach up these leaders of like, everything you do is going to be in the fishbowl and everybody's watching all the time. And I'm like, to me, that's almost, you play that both sides as well. And I think the risk we run is making sure that we absolutely don't ever take a shortcut on building the team. Right. So when we think about the intentionality with every step in the process, how are we recruiting people onto our team? How are we onboarding and making them understand the expectations and what we have capacity to deal with and where we don't have negotiables and things like that? And retaining. How are we retaining our top talent to say, you are a part of what we're building here and we need you to stay at the table? And I start with that piece of the answer because I think ultimately, if we do that well, then the leader's job is just to give your talent space to breathe. right? Is to go that micromanagement goes away if you trust that you have brought in the right people who have the right intention and the right skills to be able to do that job. I think sometimes you risk the leader getting in trouble because he or she has this rigid idea of what the outcome's going to be. So in their mind, they've already said, this is what the final product looks like, and this is how we got there. And I think in those moments in coaching, I try to tell the leader, then communicate that up front. Guys, this specific project, I'm not looking for too much conversation about. Like, this is what I'm kind of set on, and this is how I want us to get there. But I think sometimes we say, let's build a new machine. And then people are like, well, we could do this with the wheels, or we could flip this, or the web could do this. But there wasn't really bandwidth to have those suggestions at that point. So I think this transparency of going in this specific project, I'm kind of committed to us taking this path. I like how innovative we are, but today I just want us to deliver this way in this specific way that I want, because I think sometimes that rub starts when I thought there was willingness to hear innovative or different ideas and different ways to think about things. And that was kind of disingenuine, right? Or the leader had convinced themselves, well, my way is the best way. So as long as I tell them do it any way they want, they're going to come right back to doing it my way anyway.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think as leaders too, we're wired for excellence and results. And I know just in my experience, that's usually what I have the end in mind, right? I always have the end in mind when I present a task or we go forth on an initiative or something like that. What I'm seeing where leaders often lack, and this is true for me too, so I'll wear this hat, is that we're not the finish line people, right? We're the big thinkers, we're the ideas, we are the game changers in innovation, and then we lack in the follow up, accountability, results that we're looking for in a specific timeline. And so then we get all the way out in this timeline and we turn around and go, wait, this isn't done yet. Right. And so when you start thinking about layering in accountability for those people that aren't necessarily finish line type of people, how do you go about encouraging the leader to either set parameters, build accountability such that the colleagues don't feel, or the team doesn't feel like it's like a heavy hammer, but there is structure for them to get feedback at certain time points, or know that they're going in the right direction?
Yeah, that's like the onion question, right? Like
Yeah.
there's just the layers that keep unfolding on that. But I think it goes back in the last question we were talking about rolling your sleeves up and being in the work with them. And I think this is a place where accountability starts that as well. So I'm going, did we develop that accountability plan together? Did we have candid conversation? Did I sit one-on-one with that person and say, I have expectations for you. I want you to have the same for me. When one of us is not delivering on our side of things, how are we going to address that? Right? So rather than it becoming this prescriptive, you owe me outcomes and here's how I'm going to hold you accountable, we say we owe the team outcomes. How can we coach and protect one another to make sure that we're moving forward on a schedule that doesn't? Because normally, if you're not delivering your outcome now, there's a ripple effect of somebody else who's paying a price a little bit along the way with that. One of the things when I stepped into this role that the team had to adjust to is that I watched very different things from my former supervisor, right? So the risk of being an internal hire is that a lot of people think it's going to be status quo and changes like that. But I'm very much a data person. I want to see the numbers. I want to understand how you're telling the story and things like that. He was more on the task side. Neither better nor worse, but I had to sit down and say, this is the data numbers I watch. These are why they're important to me and things like that. So I think for accountability, that's a piece of it too, is saying what sort of data metrics are important? What numbers will you watch as the leader? What are the thresholds I need to deliver? And then do we as leaders have tolerance for stretch goals? Right? So when I ask the team to set goals for the year, which they will be accountable to, we say, okay, 3 of the 4, you should feel pretty confident that you're going to do it. But I also want a goal where you go, oh, this is maybe not going to that clearly be able to get there, but I want it. If all 4 of your goals, you're like, I know these are slam dunk goals, we're probably not moving forward together, right? Because you're taking for granted that you can do that. I sat with the team, the very first staff meeting, and said, if I do nothing else right, I want to bring you 2 things out of this office. I want to be consistent and I want to be predictable. And if as a leader, I can bring you those 2 things, I think we're going to be okay, because you'll know that I'm treating all of you the same way. I'm treating all the situations the same way, and that I'm predictable. You can say, if I took this to Dave, he's probably going to say X, then I think we're probably getting it right.
That's great. Consistent and predictable. And what's interesting about leadership is oftentimes, like you said, an internal hire, we're climbing this corporate ladder, right? We're always moving up or looking to move up. And so we don't challenge the status quo. And I will say one of the biggest things I've run into from coaching top performers and even brokerage leadership company clientele is that there are no KPIs, right? They have the vision, they have a really great vision, they have the mission behind them. There aren't KPIs, so that having the numbers, what do we tolerate? What is the goal and what is the stretch goal? And having that conversation consistently, that's what lends itself to the vision. I mean, the vision and mission is painted on the wall. They can see it when they come to work every day. It's just what gets us to that point. And that to me, for leaders out there, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, what are KPIs? They're key performance indicators, and they are numbers that you're tracking or specific outcomes that you're tracking such that you will get to the end result. And in real estate, we often equate it to number of calls, number of contacts, number of appointments, contracts, and closings, right? Those are those standard metrics. And at the same time, we have to also look at what are some of the other initiatives that we want to accomplish and what are the numbers, the goals, and the stretch goals beyond that. Because for me, I see that as the biggest trap that leaders fall into, is assuming they don't need them, or the other person knows what they should be tracking and they're tracking it, but they're really not.
It would be so good. I've not come to this state, right? But the idealized state would be that you've built such a culture of safety on your team that not only did we all agree on what the measures were, but even if a measure was just for one of us, we agreed as a team, we're going to look at all of our data performance on these numbers as a group. So it's not going to be like Dave didn't deliver, but Debbie did, but it's going to go, okay, Debbie's got things under control. Dave's lagging. How can we help? What support do we need? How can we strategize differently as a team to pull someone up? Because I think there is a cutthroatedness that's still there in a lot of teams that's just like, okay, I'm going to worry about myself first. And boy, to me, that becomes a big risk of damaging the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to go back to what you said and just repeat it again: consistency and predictability. And that's what that response tone is, what I'll call it, is something that oftentimes would help settle that conversation or not make that a tough conversation to have around Debbie's producing and Dave's not. It's just more of it's a team effort and let's rally. But I understanding that would be your predictable response or predictable behavior allows for that vulnerability and transparency for sure.
And I think that's been that idea of saying, especially if it's a one-off, maybe Debbie's not producing this year because X has happened in her life, or she's dealing with something outside of work, or, she's got a sick parent, or she's got this and things like that. So I think it just becomes more of going, okay, once you have this pattern of saying we're going to collectively figure out who needs just a little boost to help us achieve those team goals at the finish line, I think that takes off. I think people respond to that and you end up really synergizing.
I agree. Well, here's one that many of our leaders have faced, whether where they are now or where they've been in the past. If you haven't experienced it, if you're a leader, it's coming. And in your book, Everyday Heroes Guide to Leadership, you write about leading in toxic and daunting environments. So how do you define those seasons, and how do strong leaders respond differently in those seasons?
Boys, it's so interesting, right? Because that concept of toxicity, I think, is prevalent. But I've been thinking a lot about toxicity over the last year or so, just because I think we're seeing more of it, right? You can see it in everything, even in customer service in the community and things like that. And watching people talk to my kids' ball coaches, and like you're just seeing this anger that's right below the surface. But it's interesting, and reflecting with the leadership lens, I really landed in this space of going, toxicity is incredibly personal. And I think we can take three people and put them in the same environment, and one will say it's highly toxic, one will say it's sort of toxic, and one will say it's not toxic at all. So the idea of how do we address toxic leadership becomes so complicated, because it's almost like, if I fix it for person A, is it going to break what person C loved and valued about that environment and things like that, right? So some people will say, oh, this space is toxic if there's a high level of accountability. Some people would say this place is toxic if there's curt communication and borderline bullying. That one's probably maybe more universal. But some people will say it's toxic if there's rigidity, right? And, I would imagine being in the real estate space, if somebody was like, I expect you to be here 9 to 5, like that's when we serve. For many people, they're like, but that's not the truth of how we do this business, right? So they'd be like, boy, this person with their expectations is too much and they don't know and things like that. And then they go down that toxic rabbit hole and things like that. So I think that toxic space is a co-owned opportunity
Mhm.
to say, are we being transparent about what's made it feel toxic for you? So do I, as a leader, have the willingness to sit you down and go, I can see you're getting disenfranchised. I want to understand more of what you're experiencing that's causing this level of frustration. And then for the team member, do they have the willingness to say, yes, this is what I'm seeing, and this is why that is? Because again, is that temporary? Is that a culture change, or is that going to be part of what it is?
Yeah.
That to me runs counter to the daunting environment. To me, the daunting environment's the exciting one, right? Daunting is like the elephant's too big. And that's exciting to me. And that's this space of going like, when the work is hard, but the ask is gigantic, I feel like we're on the cusp of doing something that we're going to talk about for the rest of our career. And that's so cool because we're going to talk about it if we nail it and it goes really well and it's a spectacular success, or we're going to talk about it if we got really close or never even got off the ground, right? So that idea of the daunting project to me is like this multi-layered piece of going, you're about to try something really spectacular. Pay attention because you don't want to miss what's going to happen and who's on board with you on that. And I think both of them, right? Like the toxic low and the daunting high. One of my current supervisor here at the college says, never get too high and never get too low. That's your number one gift you can give yourself as a leader. I am terrible at this. I get both too high and too low on a routine basis. But the advice about being like, can you be stable? Can you just experience the wins as wins? Can you experience the loss as teaching moments and keep moving forward? But I think both in dealing with the toxicity, remember that toxicity is a temporary status, and daunting is going to diminish in time as you make progress towards that goal.
Yeah, and then what's the gut check? If you say, you're one of those people that can go really high and go really low, or maybe you go one or the other depending on your personality styles. What's the gut check on that to know when you're too high, or maybe I should walk it back a little bit? What is it for you? Since you said you can swing both ways. What is it for you that helps you bring awareness around? Yeah, I should probably level this out a little bit.
And I guess for me, I've been somewhat intentional about saying I know my safe space to be really high or really low. And I think you remember in one of the earlier questions we were talking about having that person who's maybe outside of your industry, so they have a little bit of distance from what you do day to day, so they might not understand some of it, which is a value add. So just knowing even in that high and the low, because one of the things that when we interview people, I say, some of these mid-management, senior management jobs are really difficult because you may have a day where you dismiss someone from the school. 15 minutes later, you're going to welcome 2,000 freshmen and tell them how great the institution is. Then you have a budget cut meeting. Then you're having a disciplinary meeting over here, but now you're going to do a media request and you're promoting. And the emotional whiplash can be so real, and going, what is your coping strategy? And we don't want it to be booze, right? So it's going like, okay, it could be if that's your thing, but knowing and having a plan to be able to be like, okay, how can I do that? Because there are definitely days where you feel like, man, the emotional battering just back and forth I went, even though half of them were positive, definitely defined today.
Yeah, that sounds like a day in the life of Debbie. I truly love all my clients, and they all come with different strengths, different weaknesses. And when any day starts and I start that first call, first of all, every client is under the impression that their call is my only call of the day, or it's my first call, even if for me on the East Coast it's 6 p.m. At the same time, it's like you never know what you're walking into until you walk in there, and it can be something really great, and it can be something that starts with tears or something that starts with anger over a team dispute. You just never know, and they don't care that my dog died last night, right? And so it is
It's all about them.
interesting. Yeah, and I can't drink a beer fast enough between calls, so I just have to just keep rolling with it. But I like that.
But as long as you convince each of them that they're your favorite call of the day,
That's
maybe how they're
exactly.
stacked is less important. As long as they all know, and you're like, I don't want to get you all in the same room at the same time. That would probably not be a good
Yeah,
way.
that might cause some conflict. So let's talk
Yeah.
about conflict because you mentioned, letting someone go. And when you think about hiring, you and I are aligned with the fact that we hire to retain, right? We really do the interview process to find the right fit for the right role. And the same with advancement within the organization. So, what happens when that person you realize is not the right fit for the organization at all, whether they create toxic situations within the environment or they don't want to comply with the new expectations around their role or the initiative? What does that look like? How do we lead through that?
It's really interesting because if we think back to when we were talking about blind spots, right?
Mhm.
I wonder if this scenario isn't too different from that, is saying that maybe that person knows those same things. So I might start with a conversation with them to say, is this working? Like, do we think this is? Because if we both agree it's not, I'm going to deploy a different set of tools and strategies with helping you move into your next opportunity than I am if we're going to engage in an adversarial separation at this point. And one thing maybe you can help me with, because I'm in a state funded organization, so that idea of saying we don't fit right now, so let's go separate directions is not nearly as easy, right? You're talking about months and months of paperwork and documentation and those sort of pieces. I always get jealous of my folks in the for profit world who are like, oh, you just let someone go? That's awesome. How did that feel? What was that like for you? But maybe that's not a good thing to lean into. But like I said, sometimes they get it, right? And this idea of going, look, there are outcomes and things like this, but you do have skills, you do have talent. Somehow you ended up in either the wrong seat or the wrong seat on the wrong bus. If we can help you shift, we can have it amicably. If not, by the way, what I'm normally doing is being really clear on those expectations and dropping that window down. So
Mhm.
you may be someone who sets annual goals with people. All of a sudden, this team member may have quarterly goals or monthly goals and
Mhm.
say, okay, I'm not going to give you that huge window of performance delivery, but instead I want to see what these measures are along the way, because now I can say, okay, our January goal was 12 cold calls, to your point in the example earlier. Okay, you did two. Okay, that's essentially the first strike on what that is. And boy, it's a miserable process, right? You're gonna lose sleep over that. You're gonna have that churn in your stomach the whole time as you're kind of trying to deal with that. Uh, but I've been shocked at the number of people who, when you've had that candid conversation, have been like, "You're right. This probably isn't the right fit. If you can be patient with me, I'm willing to try to move on and figure out what comes next."
Yeah. I'm always a fan of the self discovery too, because both parties end up discovering something that they didn't know, which will make the leader a better leader for the future and will make the other person either a better worker or better themselves, or they've just realized that this isn't even the right school that they're going to. They got on the wrong bus going to the wrong school. And so they make those changes on their own. What's interesting is, as you were saying about in your space, there's a lot of paperwork and there's time between the first call and the last call, right? And for us, we have the ability to say, "Hey, this just isn't working. You're out of here. Like you've done all these things. We're done. You haven't shown up." At the same time, I feel in these types of situations, and I see it more with teams, is that they don't like the hard conversations, right? Leaders, not many people love and embrace hard conversations, right? I don't either. At the same time, I'm not afraid to have them because we both learn something. um, I look at it as oftentimes they use that as the easy button, right? So I can just let this person go, and then I don't have to rise up as a leader to find out what did I do wrong, or what could I have done or shown up better as, or maybe I missed something. And so it becomes that, yeah, we can let them go because it's just not working out. I mean, they've been late for the last 3 weeks every day, and they didn't come to the team meeting, and they haven't put one deal on the board. So it's just not working out. We let them go versus slowing down, like in your space where we get to act. We're forced, right? We're forced to have the conversation. You've been late every day. What's going on? Well, my daughter's daycare doesn't open on time, right? Or you haven't made your contacts or your appointments. What's going on, right? And so you actually, the way you explain it is something we should be doing in leadership, in that slowing down and not just pushing the eject button, because it feels like the easiest thing to do in the moment. We'll just move on and find somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that's it. There's such poignancy in that, right? Because I think the question is going. I think of an old quote. I can't remember the whole quote, but it's like, is what you're experiencing, or is that attribute a reason, a season, or a lifetime, right? And it's going, okay, if you're late and it's about daycare, I thought that was a great example. If I trusted my hiring process, I brought you onto this team because you demonstrated a track record of talent.
Mhm.
Is there a pathway to give you a year's worth of grace to come in at 9 rather than 8 so that you can get things stabilized? Because by letting you go, either you totally misrepresented yourself throughout this whole hiring process, or something is temporarily disrupting what that is. And I may be the disruption, right? We may just be water and oil and it may not work, but the disruption may be your child example or an ill parent, or it might just be, honestly, I relocated for this job and I don't have Wi-Fi at home now and everybody's stressed out and my kid is learning to. So I think there's that idea of going like, if we trust that we're hiring really good people, there should be some tolerance for being like, okay, can you share with me candidly what that is? And I've always told people, like, there should never be something in an evaluation that the employee is hearing for the first time, right?
Exactly.
But I think some leaders take that as the opportunity. They're like, I didn't want to have this difficult conversation all year. I'm going to wait till the evaluation. And then I'm going to say, you need to be a better communicator in the evaluation. I'm like, but if you had mentioned that 6 months ago, they could have spent 6 months working on this and you could actually have been celebrating their communication growth in this evaluation. But your point's so well taken that you don't want to do it. I was fortunate to run the speaker circuit for a long time. And in our difficult conversation session, one of the more powerful moments was we would be like, okay, why do we have difficult conversations? Let's rank order these 10. Now I want you to pick one of the 10. And I want to know the words you would use to actually go in the conversation. And routinely, it would be like that, that screeching sound. It's like the session would stop because people are like, what do you mean? What would I say? I'm like, yeah, let's role play and have the conversation. Like, you need to tell me that I'm underperforming. And it's fascinating because in the example we've been using, it's about being late, right? Mm-hmm. Being late is so easy because it's a behavior that can be isolated and identified. And yes, no is really easy. Tomorrow, did I come on time? Let's say I'm using AI to do my work for me. Mm-hmm. Let's say I'm under delivering. Let's say my contracts are coming in with errors that someone on the office staff has to be routinely cleaning. Those are less tangible, right? Mm-hmm. Countable, if you will.
Trackable. Yeah, just that tracking. Mm-hmm.
So in that space, it becomes even a little more difficult then to say, okay, how do we do this in a way that's people focused and leading with empathy and grace, but also saying, okay, you're not getting forever grace, but you're getting some space to say, okay, can we actually make this work for both sides?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting that little things, like we talk about metrics, it's often the big metrics, but the little things that are trackable, like you said, that we could shortcut consistent errors or shortcut tough conversations because we mention it early, like we notice it on the first 2 or 3 and we bring it up. And that's where I think that word leadership transitions to management. And I have seen, and I believe that a lot of individuals get into leadership with a management mindset. Not saying that there's anything with management. I'm saying when people think of management, they initially go to like overseeing. I oversee people. I don't have expectations around what my people are supposed to do. I'm just like managing. I'm the daycare leader, right? I make sure all the kids are in the playground. I make sure everybody gets off the bus. I make sure they all have lunch. And that's where oftentimes then when that hard conversation shows up, they're not equipped for it because they've been leading in a management style way versus a leadership style way and didn't mention it 3 weeks ago when they noticed it.
Yeah, and I think that pushes us back to that consistent and predictable piece of the conversation as well, because one of the quickest things that will derail my team sometimes is going that a middle manager will not like a particular staff member. So all of a sudden I'll hear, well, they're late routinely. So you talk to them and they go, by the way, Susie, my other front desk person, is also late all the time. So you go back to the manager and say, hey, they say Susie's late as well. And you're like, yeah, but Susie has this issue with her kid at the daycare. And it's like, you're killing me. You're killing me. Because now we clearly have a much bigger issue that we have to unpack.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. Well, here's what's interesting. I'd love for you to walk us through this one. And one I think we've all experienced as leaders, that leadership is lonely at the top. And the tendency would be either to be lonely, understanding that we have as leaders high expectations put upon us from whoever's above us, as well as the natural high expectations we have of ourselves, to the point that we might turn to become more friendly with our colleagues, friendly versus professional, or we may just stay over here in our lonely box and cause it to have impacts on how we lead. So think about that process of lonely at the top. How do we avoid that as leaders?
Yeah, it is. I talk a lot about feeling like I'm on an island, right?
Yep.
Like that I'm the only one in this space who kind of knows it. So there are other vice presidents across the state that I reach out to and are just like, hey, can we talk? I've recently tried to initiate like a provost happy hour where I said, can we just all get on Zoom and talk about what's keeping us up at night for 40 minutes before we leave for the day on Wednesdays so that we can just kind of have that community a little bit, but in a way that people understand what the roles are. Because for me, it's always been really hard to find the balance of sharing my human side and being a little bit vulnerable, contextualizing the challenges of the role that I'm in right now, but not falling into a pattern of being a gossip or talking too much about things that I can't necessarily talk about, especially when that shapes my decision-making process, right? Because I'm shocked at how many times I have confidential information or information I can't share, which has shaped a decision. And I have to just count on the trust of my team that they would think that I wouldn't make a truly bizarre decision without a reason. The counterpart of that is like sometimes that team's united and it's against me. And I still think that's okay. I'm like, if you guys are coming together, but it's because you're perceiving for right now me as the common enemy, that's okay too, because that means your team is gelling a little bit. And I'll take that if it's moving us forward together.
Hmm. I love that idea of finding like-minded people outside of your area, and that's what I found with coaching top performers. It's that there's only a limited number of top performers in each area, and we see that in real estate across the board. You know, there's the top 1%, but they are spread across the nation, and so having that outlet, because you're right, it does become one of those things where if you had someone like Wednesday afternoon, you know, here's the biggest thing I've got going on. Somebody is going to see it differently. And I won't go into the story, but I was sharing with you when we first met about a client. None of you that are listening, I didn't share anything personal. Just a concept that we were working on, and you were saying, okay, well, we'll look at it this way, look at it differently. And so I think sometimes to have that other person say to you, well, what about this perspective? It is hugely valuable because we are making decisions based on someone's income, their life, their job satisfaction, a project that would push through billions of dollars. I mean, there's so many things at stake in leadership that you can't just go home and tell your spouse and expect them to give you a well-rounded answer, or ask a colleague who could jeopardize sharing too much information. So I do like that idea of like, find that group. Yeah.
It is, and especially because we turn to our spouse to be it, right? For many of us, that's who it is. But it's funny because my wife knows that she's going to say, how was the day? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk about the day. Like I dedicate so much thought time to my work and the team and moving that forward that this is time with you. And I want to do happy things and family things and push forward because it dominates. So I know it's important and we have to have that conversation. But boy, the idea of having the colleague who can just kind of turn that heater down a little bit, just to norm it, so we can go home and be really positive in those other spaces. Because we don't want to lose sight that leadership at work is one thing, but leadership at home matters too, and making sure that we don't take that emotional whiplash we were talking about earlier and let it translate directly into dinner time and downtime there at home.
Yeah. Well, as we're recording this, today is my 25th wedding anniversary. And what's interesting, oh,
Congratulations.
thank you. What's interesting about that is we agreed many, many years ago that there is like a very, very small window that we would mention anything about work, but it's not really about work. It's like something funny that happened or something that we overcame personally. And so, I think partially that was because I know my husband wouldn't give me the same, and I can promise you he's not listening because he doesn't listen to any of my podcasts. He will never give me the same response that like that's the way I was thinking, because we're just too different brained, and so it just is easier just to move on.
And it does. My wife loves talking about her job. I want to hear about it. I let her talk it through, and then I'm like, good, you're like the puffer fish. You tell me all the stories and let it out, and then let's just move on to like the next piece. And I'll probably get in trouble for calling my wife a puffer fish, so maybe we'll
She's
have to
not
think
a
that piece through.
No, she's not a pufferfish. She's awesome. And pufferfish made it into Nemo, right? So she's got to be somewhat of a
Plays
celebrity.
okay.
Yes, yes. So you've spent your career for the most part in adult education, or through nonprofits. And so when we think about motivation of teams through the leadership side, not all the negative, but how do we bring motivation to adults? With kids, we hold up an airhead or a water balloon or something that makes them laugh, and they're off to the races. How do we continually bring motivation to adults that encourage them to like enjoy what they're doing, enjoy the process?
Yeah, one of the things we really have pushed lately is trying to get our students a message of like, I see you, right? Because in the community college system, a lot of people are returning students and adult students and things like that. So I've really embraced this mindset of going, I want to say, I see you driving down our hill with a set of experiences and skills and talents in hand. So how do we honor them? How do we say, yes, you worked as a bank teller for 15 years, or you worked in real estate for a while. If you came after a real estate career, how can we say maybe contracting is not a relevant class for you to take? How do we honor what you've accrued and been able to do? And I think it's the same as in the field when we're leading that team. People's number one goal is to feel respected, right? And almost everything I do as a leader can be done through that framework of respect. I have fired people who've thanked me at the end of, and I'm not saying that as a boasting piece, right? But I think there's the difference between how you get there. I think ultimately people want to be part of something bigger than just themselves. So if we sit down and help people understand how what they're doing fits into the long-term goals and the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish collectively, they're more likely to be motivated, right? So there's an adage that says, if you want people to help you build a ship, don't just send them gathering wood, sell them on sailing the open seas, right? So it's that same concept of being like, tell me how my woodworking helps us sail out to that horizon. And I think people are more bought in if they're like, I get that this is more than just widget making.
Yeah, that is my favorite part of our whole conversation that I know I will take with me into coaching calls is that, share with them the enjoyment of sailing the seas, not just building the ship. And ultimately it leads to trust, right? And that is the foundational framework of every relationship, from leadership to coworker to, anything, family. You can take it anywhere. It's trust. And so, by seeing them meeting them where they are and making sure that they're heard, it's also establishing that trust that you are going to get them out onto the friendly seas or tumultuous seas, whatever shows up first. But the boat's not going to sink. We're the unsinkable boat. Yeah,
That's right.
love it. And a little contest here and there doesn't help people. So let's be real. I mean, every adult wants a little challenge, even if they say they don't like challenges. They like to be celebrated and have some fun. So find out what your people enjoy and put that in front of them too. So if you are sitting across from a leader who feels, I don't like the word overwhelmed, but feels a bit exhausted from the weight of leadership, maybe they're in a season where they're working to build something big and it's taking a little bit longer than they anticipated, or they might feel like they don't have the right people on the team, or they don't have the people on the team at all. What would you want them to remember about themselves in that moment?
I think the first thing I'd ask them to remember is you earned this. You earned this opportunity. Your organization wasn't desperate for someone to serve in this role. They didn't come begging you to say, we have no one else to lead. Like, they chose you from a competitive process, and your seat at the table was deserved. And I think sometimes that gives us this ability to take a deep breath, recenter a little bit, and be like, okay, I was chosen to lead this for a reason. I earned the opportunity, and I do have skills and talents which can help us move it forward. Then to me, it's about saying, okay, what's one thing I can achieve today to move forward on this project? However big or small that is, can I accomplish one meaningful stride forward on this today, move it from the to-do list to the done list? And then I'm going to start this sense of momentum that'll hopefully carry me through into more of that deeper purpose-driven space. But I think those would be the things, is remember that you earned that seat to be able to be the one who's stressed out by leading this project. And then find the one meaningful, they talk about writing a book, right? Mm-hmm. And they say the best way to write a book is to write 20 minutes a day. And you'll end up with a book at a certain point. And it's like, That's such a great way to reframe it, I think, for me, is this idea of going, if you want to be a writer, you write. If you want to be a leader, you lead. So what is the one way that you can move a piece of this project forward today? And I think meaning will follow that.
Yeah, and you're here for a reason. I go back to something you said earlier, and you said we were talking about accountability and just kind of bringing the window down a little bit. Sometimes as leaders, we keep the window shut, and we're always shooting for the goal, the big number, the big win on the board, and it is just about what we can do today and what we can control. I think oftentimes we get caught up in the things we can't control and label ourselves as not being successful in that piece as a leader, and it's really, it is about, what can you control. I love that. Yeah, so bring it back to the one thing. All right. So now the way I want to end this is with fun, right? It's all about having fun and motivating. So I've got some rapid fire questions for you, and they're very short answers. Don't put a lot of thought into it. Would love your perspective. Okay.
All right, here we
Number
go.
one word that defines great leadership.
Intentionality.
Intentionality. One leadership habit you had to unlearn.
Thinking I had all the answers.
Oh, I love that one. Thinking you had all the answers. The fastest way to lose trust on a team. Lying. A book every leader should read, and yours, but besides yours.
Nice. I want to say, and this is maybe it will make you laugh, but You're Lucky You're Funny by Phil Rosenthal. I just finished reading. So if you're not familiar, he's like the lead writer for the TV show Everybody Loves Raymond.
Uh-huh.
And I just picked it up on a whim, and it was fantastic. And this idea of managing actors plus support staff plus the contracts plus the stories, it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. I can't recommend it enough. It was an awesome read.
So You're Lucky You're Funny by, who was that again?
Phil Rosenthal.
Okay, I'm downloading it because I love that stuff.
Okay, do it.
All right.
Tell me what you think. It's great.
I will. We'll get together for a book review, and then I'll tell you the biggest challenge I'm trying to overcome on that day. One phrase leaders should stop saying.
Well, I'm going to go with the way we used to.
Oh, the way we used to. That's a good one. All right, last one. Finish this sentence. Leadership is unlocked when
we beats me.
Oh, when we beats me. Such a team player. I love this. Well, Dave, I have truly enjoyed our time together. You're a wealth of knowledge. We'll drop your website for your blog in the show notes so they can find you and follow you. And we'll also link your book so they can check you out from book version versus blog version. Thank you again so much. And to all our listeners, we will see you next time.